Well, Sarah, one of your favorite education publications, K-12 Dive, is the source of my story this week. They wrote about the sixth anniversary of Colorado's 27J school district's implementation of a 4-day school week. So, a little bit of backstory. Back in 2018, after the district failed for a few years in a row to get voter approval to increase local taxes to boost education funding, 27J moved to a 4-day week to reduce expenditures and to boost teacher retention. The Colorado district is one of approximately 900 districts throughout the country that have adopted shorter weeks, with additional instructional hours added to each school day to make up the time difference. 27J offers low-cost childcare services for families on Mondays when school is not in session. Now, in terms of academic impact, the results of the change have been mixed for the 27J district, though the district's graduation rates have actually increased from 77.4% to 90.9% between 2017 and 2022. At least one research paper has shown that the district's student achievement has dropped a bit since the change, though those figures are disputed by the district superintendent, Chris Fiedler. Fiedler also notes that the change to a 4-day work week has resulted in the school district having one of the lowest teacher turnover rates in the state, despite the fact that the district has also one of the lowest average teacher salaries. So, pretty interesting give and take there. A school district taking a significant approach to try to redress the lack of funding, and to the point of the. I think an additional thing worth noting here is the superintendent does note that while this may has resulted in some positive impacts in the area of teacher retention, for example, he is quick to note that the change was mainly spurred by a lack of funding. A quote from the article here from the superintendent, quote, "The 4-day work week is the second best option, and the first best option is to pay teachers and support staff well." So this was a change that was born by lack of resources, but it has produced some interesting results.
Right. So it's interesting you bring up 4-day work week. So I actually had the chance to visit a school recently that has a 4-day work week. So we were at a state meeting at a school, Pompano Beach High School has a
Oh,
4-day
right
work
by
week. It's a
us.
Broward County public school. And I have to do some homework because I wasn't prepared for this episode. I have to do some homework on their achievement record and how long they've been doing this. But several years ago, I remember going to meetings there, and it was a popular place to have meetings because of the fact that on Fridays, there were no students on campus. So it was easier to have professional development at those schools or to have administrative meetings at that school. And so there was a lot of us who were very curious, of course, about the 4-day work week. And so I think some kind of misconceptions that I would throw out there is that a lot of people hear that and they think, well, if kids can learn the same in 4 days versus 5, are they losing out on the same instructional minutes? And by and large, what my understanding is that I think a traditional school calendar has 360 instructional minutes in a week. And they do that. They just crunch that into 4 school days versus 5 so that you would have an extended day. It sounds like in the case that you brought up, Tuesday through Friday, they would have an extended day. And then there's childcare available on Monday. What we learned from Pompano Beach, the way that they had structured things was that they had school Monday through Thursday, traditional longer days. And then on Fridays, essentially you have a built-in teacher planning day every week, but they also had time for additional intervention programs, and they had time for additional tutoring programs and additional things for some populations that can't have a day off from school, right? If you have students with disabilities or something that they need additional time. So there is programming, I should say, that continues in a lot of these schools. And I would be very curious to ask more questions about why the principal, or was it the superintendent, contested some of those academic scores. I would be very curious. I have a hunch that some of it is, if it's anything like here in Florida, if you're looking from 2017 to 2022, there was something that happened in between those 5 years, right? That might have had an
Might be
impact on student
disrupting the data a little
achievement.
bit.
So, asterisks next to some of those years at least. But then again, if we're talking about a state like Florida, there's still asterisks, I would think, by many of our post-pandemic years, because there have been changes in our standards and our testing in the past couple years. So you're not exactly comparing apples to apples. If you were to say there's a 65% achievement in reading versus 5 years ago, a 65% achievement in reading, I don't know that you can call those things exactly the same if you're not using an outside source like, a national test to give a little bit of credence to those numbers. Um, Overall, I think that there's a lot to be said about the um, the positives of a 4-day week. I know that we were kind of joking, but a lot of us, the day that we were at Pompano Beach, we were talking about, people were saying, "Oh, but you have to work a longer day, 4 days a week versus that fifth day." And so many of us were saying, "Who stays really only for the hours that you're contracted for?"
Yeah,
That's
every
something
teacher I know is already working the longer
they're
day and
already
then
that's
some.
exactly what we were saying. Most of us are already putting those extra hours in. You're just not compensated for it, and you don't have that extra day of planning at the end of the week or at the beginning of the week, depending on how they schedule you, to get the rest of your stuff done. So, it seems almost too good to be true, but I don't know how many schools or school districts are actually willing to, try the experiment. It sounds like you said um, it was done primarily for budgetary reasons, which is almost like a feature, not a bug, right? So, in addition
Yeah.
to these being some additional positives, that seems like it overall brings a lot of positivity with regard to teacher shortages, which we're all struggling with. You also would be saving money on just so many different elements, on busing, on lighting, on, janitorial staff. Like, there's just so many things that could possibly go well. That's not to say there are no negatives, right? There's a lot of things that you have to consider, especially at like a high school level. Are there opportunities for students on that day to do something productive with their time? Are they able to, do maybe like a work study type program, or do they have support for, um, there's a lot of programming that is available, but if that programming is not available, what are the additional options for those kids to do something that potentially would get them into trouble, right? And those are
Yeah.
not the steps that we want to take place when we put in an idea like this. But overall, I think it's really interesting to see when schools take a big jump like that and to say, hey, we're going to try something that we think can be really beneficial, and then to see what the data says after, because I would almost venture to say, just my hot take on that, even if things were to stay flat, it would at the very least tell you that putting in that extra day doesn't make a statistically significant difference.
Absolutely. And I mean, I didn't know we had one of these kind of schools so close to our neck of the woods, Sarah. That's pretty exciting. I mean, I feel like a field trip is in order. I kind of want to see what a
I did,
campus
like
that
I said, I
has.
need to do some more homework. It's been a while since I've looked at their numbers, but I remember it being a pretty successful school.
I'm intrigued by this, and it's a shame that ideas like this can sometimes only emerge out of budgetary necessity as opposed to a spirit to genuinely innovate. Because I think there are a lot of interesting places of innovation that can come from the 4-day uh, academic schedule. You talked about the potential for enrichment activities. Imagine a day on a day on campus that didn't have structured class periods, where you could have students doing, enrichment work, accelerated coursework, extracurricular activities, remedial work if they need some time to catch up on assignments, college prep, mentoring, work study, internships. Like, there's a whole lot we can do if we can leave that day available, or, giving teachers more time for planning or just more time for rest to reduce teacher turnover, boost teacher retention. A lot of things worth exploring in this, and certainly not something we want to defend out of hand as just, oh, this is only something schools do when they don't have the budget to keep the lights on for 5 days a week.
I agree. Again, I didn't do homework for this episode, but I think I will be doing a little bit of homework to see where cases might exist in which this was, like you said, a more innovative choice and not just a you're stuck doing this. But I mean, I think so many businesses and organizations in general have moved to a less frequent in-person model because they don't see a giant decrease in productivity. And if that's the case, then why are we spending all of this money lighting in businesses and cleaning and a lot of organizations? I know I was talking to somebody about even just things like parking lots becoming space sharing, right? How do we multi-use this space? What else can we do with this space? Because there is not a need 24/7 for it to be used the way we intended. And so schools can operate like kind of with some of the amazing things that you mentioned, these additional extracurricular programs, maybe bring in businesses that could do work study. If you didn't have a Friday that was a traditional school day, maybe you could partner with a technology company and they bring some of their staffing in on those Fridays, and students can kind of have a built-in incubator to share ideas. I mean, there's just so many different things that could happen if we get out of the way of what's always been.
That's really, really interesting stuff. So, I mean, I after talking with you about this, getting your perspective as somebody who is a lot more on the ground and is seeing a lot of these schools in action, it's making the wheels turn for me more. I'm excited to see what we could do with this model. I know that this model is growing, right? It's still not by any means the predominant instructional model, but
At all.
more and more districts are embracing it every year, and so I think we're going to hear more stories like this.
Yeah, I hope so.
Now,
Like I said, I'll do some homework.
you got a pretty interesting and inspiring story for us, Sarah.
I do. Well, as a former English teacher and, overall nerd, I wanted to share a story that touches on a very deeply held belief of my own, which is the belief that if we can connect the right story to the right student, we can create a lifelong love of reading and learning. And nothing brings that belief to life like the story I found on the New York Times website this week. This story begins with a teacher who found a way to bring connection, belonging, and the transformative power of literature alive for his students.